Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're diving into a topic that sounds old as history, yet somehow feels extremely relevant today. I'm talking about feudalism, not as something buried in dusty textbooks, but as a living system that's still shaping our world. Now, before you tune out, hear me out. Feudalism, as most of us learned it in school, was this medieval system. Kings, knights, serfs, land, in exchange for loyalty and protection. The nobles owned everything, and everyone else worked the land. You were born into your class, and your chances of moving up were basically zero. But what if I told you that feudalism didn't really go away? It didn't vanish in 1500 something. It didn't die with the Renaissance. It didn't disappear with industrialization. Instead, it evolved. It changed shape, and it adapted to modern economic forces that are just as powerful, just less obvious. That's what we're unpacking in this video, how the old system of hierarchy, obligation, and economic dependency has shifted into something new, something that still influences where power and wealth live today. So let's start with the base. Back then, the peasants were tied to the land. They couldn't leave because survival depended entirely on their relationship to the lord of the manor. It was about who controlled the land, and by extension, who controlled survival itself. Today, we may not be tied to land, but we are tied to prices, credit, jobs, and access. If you don't have a good job, you can't afford health care. If you don't have savings, a medical emergency can ruin you. If you don't have credit or collateral, you can't buy a home. You're technically free, but you're still locked into a system that limits your options and rewards those who already control capital and power. At first glance, it doesn't look the same as medieval feudalism. There are no castles or knights, and no legal obligation forcing peasants into servitude. But if you zoom out, the structure has eerie similarities. So here's the first big idea we need to understand. Freedom without options isn't freedom at all. When economic pressure, like debt, housing costs, job markets, controls your choices, the system shapes your life just as much as those old feudal rules did. And that's what we'll dive into next. How modern economic systems replicate feudal dynamics through money, markets, and social mobility. We're not done yet, but you'll see how this ancient system didn't die. It just got a makeover. Lords without castles, corporate power, and modern feudalism. Now let's go deeper and talk about who holds power today. Because you don't need castles and crowns to run a feudal system. All you need is control over resources. Back in medieval times, land was everything. If you controlled land, you controlled food. And if you controlled food, you controlled people. Today, land isn't the main resource anymore. Capital is money, assets, data, technology, infrastructure. And the people who control those things don't wear armor. They wear suits. Modern corporations have quietly taken the role of feudal lords. Think about it. Your income depends on a company. Your healthcare often depends on your employer. Your retirement depends on financial markets you don't control. Even your ability to live in a city depends on rent prices set by investors. You're not legally owned by anyone, but your survival is still deeply tied to institutions far more powerful than you. And just like feudal lords, these institutions don't need to be cruel to be controlling. They just need to be essential. In feudalism, peasants worked the land and gave a portion of their labor to the lord. Today, workers create value, and a large share of that value flows upward to shareholders and executives. The system isn't about fairness. It's about who captures the surplus. Now let's talk about something even more important. Mobility. We're often told that modern capitalism is different because anyone can move up. Work hard, get educated, hustle enough, and you'll make it. But when you look at the data, something feels off. Wages haven't kept up with productivity. Housing costs have exploded. Healthcare and education costs keep rising. Meanwhile, asset owners, people who already have wealth, benefit the most. So even though movement is technically possible, it's becoming harder, slower, and rarer. That's a classic feudal pattern. Not a locked caste system, but a sticky hierarchy, where most people stay close to where they started, and a small group keeps accumulating more power with each generation. Debt plays a massive role here. Debt is modern feudalism's strongest chain. Student loans, credit cards, mortgages, medical bills. Debt doesn't just take your money, it takes your future choices. You can't quit a bad job if you're drowning in loans. You can't take risks if missing one paycheck could ruin you. You can't say no because the system punishes instability. That's not freedom. That's dependency. And just like feudal peasants needed permission to leave the land, modern workers need financial security to leave bad situations. Most don't have it. Here's the key realization in this part. Modern feudalism isn't enforced by law, it's enforced by necessity. No one forces you to participate, but opting out is nearly impossible. And this is exactly why the system is so effective. It doesn't feel oppressive. It feels normal. Now comes the hardest question of all. Is this system permanent, or is there actually a way out? To answer that, we need to talk about the future and the forces that could either lock this system in forever or finally break it apart. Let's start with technology. For years, technology was sold to us as the great equalizer. The internet would democratize knowledge. Automation would free people from boring jobs. Innovation would create opportunity for everyone. But reality turned out to be more complicated. Technology doesn't automatically distribute power. It amplifies whoever already has it. Big tech companies don't just provide tools, they control platforms, data, and digital infrastructure. If medieval lords controlled land, modern lords control networks. And networks decide who gets visibility, income, and influence. Think about it. A small algorithm change can destroy someone's livelihood. A platform ban can erase years of work. A monopoly can crush competition before it even starts. Again, no chains, no force, just dependency. And that brings us to a dangerous possibility, digital feudalism. A world where people don't own their labor, their audience, or even their digital identity. They merely rent access from platforms that can change the rules at any time. Now, let's talk about the idea people often bring up as the solution. Just work harder. That advice made sense in a growing system. But in a system where wealth concentrates at the top, individual effort alone isn't enough. You can't hustle your way out of a rigged structure. That doesn't mean effort doesn't matter. It means effort without leverage keeps people trapped. Real freedom comes from ownership. Ownership of assets. Ownership of time. Ownership of skills that can't be easily replaced. Historically, every time feudal systems weakened, it wasn't because lords became generous. It was because power decentralized. The middle class emerged, labor organized, institutions changed. And that leads to the real question. Are we moving toward decentralization or toward a more polished, more efficient form of feudalism? The answer isn't clear yet. On one hand, we see rising inequality, corporate consolidation, and systems that reward ownership over labor. On the other hand, we see new ideas gaining traction of worker ownership, cooperative models, remote work, and technologies that allow individuals to bypass traditional gatekeepers. The outcome depends on awareness. Because here's the thing about modern feudalism, it survives best when people believe it's natural, when they think, this is just how the world works. The moment people start recognizing patterns, who controls resources, who captures value, and who carries risk, the spell begins to break. Feudalism didn't end overnight in the past. It eroded. Slowly, unevenly, and often painfully. What we're living in now might not be the final form of this system, but it is a turning point. The real danger isn't technology. It isn't capitalism. It isn't even inequality by itself. The real danger is a future where dependency becomes permanent and mobility becomes an illusion. So the final takeaway is this: modern feudalism isn't inevitable, but escaping it requires more than motivation. It requires understanding, it requires collective pressure, and it requires systems that reward participation, not just ownership. Because history shows us one thing very clearly: no feudal system lasts forever, but none collapse unless people first realize they're living in one. I hope you all have understood. To see more such videos, like the video, and tell me on which topic you want the next video, and also subscribe.